Ever heard of Columbus discovering America? Yeah, we all have. It's practically etched into our brains, right? But what if I told you that story might be incomplete, a little lacking? Prepare to have your history books rewritten, because today we're diving headfirst into a question that's been swirling around for centuries. Did the Vikings beat Columbus to the New World? Forget everything you think you know about the discovery of America. That neat, tidy narrative we've all been taught? It's far more complicated than that. Because long before Columbus even dreamt of sailing the ocean blue, a hardy band of Norse explorers were already braving the treacherous Atlantic. We're talking about Vikings, those legendary seafarers, known for their long ships, their raiding parties, and their incredible navigational skills. And their voyages weren't just about pillaging coastal towns. They were exploring. They were discovering. Think about it. The sheer audacity. Imagine setting sail in a wooden ship across a vast, unpredictable ocean with nothing but the stars and your instincts as your guide. No GPS, no weather satellites, no sophisticated charts. Just courage, skill, and a healthy dose of Viking grit. That's what we're talking about here. These weren't weekend trips. These were epic expeditions, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. The evidence? It's compelling, to say the least. We're not just talking about whispered legends or fanciful tales passed down through generations. We're talking about tangible proof. We're talking about archaeological discoveries that have shattered the traditional narrative. We're talking about settlements, artifacts, and the undeniable presence of Norse explorers on the shores of North America, centuries before Columbus ever set foot on the continent. This isn't some fringe theory dreamed up by armchair historians. This is a serious re-examination of a pivotal moment in history. For years, the accepted narrative has placed Columbus firmly at the forefront of the New World's discovery. But the more we dig, the more we find evidence challenging that narrative, suggesting a far more complex and fascinating history of transatlantic exploration. Think about the implications. If the Vikings did indeed reach North America centuries before Columbus, it completely reshapes our understanding of the encounter between European explorers and the indigenous populations. It changes the timeline, it alters the narrative, and it throws into question everything we thought we knew about the discovery of America. This isn't just about revising a few dates in a textbook. It's about fundamentally shifting our perspective on one of history's most significant events. So, did the Vikings beat Columbus to the New World? The answer, as we delve deeper into the evidence, becomes increasingly clear. The weight of historical and archaeological findings points towards a resounding yes. But the story doesn't end there. It's a story filled with mysteries, unanswered questions, and the thrilling pursuit of uncovering the truth. And that, my friends, is just the beginning. So, the Vikings, we've established they might have beaten Columbus to America. But how do we even know? How can we possibly piece together a story from centuries ago? The answer, my friends, lies in the Vinland Sagas. These aren't dusty old tomes locked away in some forgotten library. They're thrilling tales passed down through generations of Norse storytellers, filled with daring voyages, fierce battles, and a land shrouded in mystery. Vinland. Think of them as the Viking version of a blockbuster adventure movie, except instead of CGI, they had icebergs, raging storms, and maybe some pretty terrifying sea monsters. But here's the million-dollar question. How much of it is real? Are these incredible stories of exploration fact, fiction, or a delicious blend of both? That's what we're here to unravel. The sagas are a primary source. They're not a single, neatly written account. Think more along the lines of a collection of interwoven narratives, handed down orally for centuries before finally being written down. Imagine the game of telephone, but spanning hundreds of years, with each storyteller adding their own spin, their own embellishments, maybe exaggerations. Two main sagas dominate the narrative: the saga of Eric the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders. They tell the story of Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, who, according to these tales, led an expedition to a land west across the ocean, a land they named Vinland. Why Vinland? because supposedly they found wild grapes growing there, a rare treat for Norsemen accustomed to the harsher climates of Scandinavia. The sagas paint vivid pictures of this new land. They describe lush forests, teeming wildlife, and even, wait for it, self-sowing wheat fields. Sounds almost too good to be true, right? Imagine the Vikings, after months at sea, stumbling upon this bountiful land, a land that seemed almost mythical in its abundance. But the sagas also depict challenges. Conflicts with the native inhabitants, described as the Skrælings, are a recurring theme. These encounters are depicted with a mix of curiosity and fear, hinting at a complex relationship, one that wasn't always peaceful. The sagas speak of clashes, trade, and even moments of uneasy coexistence. So, are the sagas reliable? Can we trust them as a historical record? Well, that's the beauty and the challenge of historical research. We can't simply take everything at face value. We have to scrutinize the details, compare different versions of the stories, and look for corroborating evidence from other sources. The sagas themselves are not without inconsistencies. Details vary between different versions, locations are described vaguely, and some events seem almost too fantastical to be entirely true. Remember, these stories were passed down orally for generations. Details get lost, embellished, and sometimes completely changed. But here's the key. The sagas aren't just fanciful tales. They provide a framework, a narrative, a foundation. They point to a specific time, a specific group of people, and a specific voyage. And that's where the archaeological evidence comes in. That's where the real story begins to unfold, transforming these legendary tales from mere stories into something far more compelling, something that might just be true. The sagas planted the seed. Archaeology is proving the existence of the tree. Okay, so we've got these amazing Vinland Sagas, these epic Norse tales of voyages across the Atlantic. But are they just stories, campfire legends embellished over centuries? Or is there something more? Something real? Well, buckle up, because the answer is a resounding yes. And the proof? It's buried, quite literally, in the earth of Newfoundland, Canada. À Plascalet de Lens aux Meadows. Forget everything you think you know about dusty old museums and boring archaeological digs. Lens aux Meadows is different. This is where history explodes into life. This is where the sagas leap off the page and become tangible reality. In 1960, a woman named Helga Ingstad, along with her husband, archaeologist and Stein Ingstad, stumbled upon something incredible. They weren't looking for Viking settlements, not initially. They were exploring, following clues from the sagas, piecing together a puzzle that had been hidden for nearly 1,000 years. And what they found changed everything. Imagine their excitement as they uncovered the remnants of a Viking village, frozen in time. Not just a few scattered artifacts, but a whole settlement. We're talking about the foundations of houses, the remains of workshops, the outlines of structures that once housed these intrepid Norse explorers. A complete snapshot of their lives in the New World. This wasn't some accidental discovery, a single stray artifact that could be dismissed as coincidence. This was a meticulously constructed village, evidence of a prolonged presence. Think about it. These weren't just brief, exploratory visits. They were establishing a base. They were setting up shop thousands of miles from home in a completely foreign land. The evidence was undeniable. The construction techniques were unmistakably Norse. The types of buildings, the way they were built, the materials used, all screamed Viking. We're not talking about vague similarities here. We're talking about a near-perfect match to the building styles found in Viking settlements in Greenland and Scandinavia. And it wasn't just the building structures. The archaeologists unearthed a wealth of artifacts, providing a fascinating glimpse into the daily lives of these Norse settlers. We're talking about ironworking tools, sophisticated enough to suggest skilled craftsmanship. We found pieces of clothing, giving us an idea of their attire. We found remnants of their cooking fires, suggesting the types of foods they consumed. They even found the remains of a forge, a place where they worked metal. This wasn't just a temporary campsite. This was a place where they were actively making and repairing tools, showing a level of permanence that contradicts the idea of just a fleeting visit. It points towards a settled existence, a community establishing itself in a new land. These artifacts weren't just scattered randomly. They were found in specific locations within the settlement, suggesting organized living spaces, workshops, and potentially even storage areas. The sheer scale of the discovery was breathtaking. This wasn't just a few isolated finds. This was a whole community that had left their mark on the North American landscape. Longboats Meadows wasn't just a random spot. The sagas themselves hint at the location, offering clues that were painstakingly pieced together by the Ingstads and subsequent researchers. The sagas and the archaeology complement each other, creating a compelling narrative that transcends the limitations of either source alone. The discovery at Longboats Meadows isn't just about confirming a Viking presence in North America. It's about challenging the very foundations of our understanding of early transatlantic exploration. It throws into sharp relief the incredible skill, the audacity, and the resilience of these Norse explorers. They sailed across a vast and treacherous ocean, established a settlement in a new land, and left behind a legacy that echoes through the centuries. It's a powerful testament to human ingenuity and exploration, a story etched not just in words, but in the very soil of Newfoundland. Longboats Meadows is more than just an archaeological site. It's a window into a pivotal moment in history, a moment that forever changed our understanding of who discovered America and when. And that, my friends, is a story worth telling. So, we found a Viking village at Longboats Meadows. A real place, not just a legend. But what did these intrepid explorers actually do there? What did their lives look like thousands of miles from home in a completely new world? The answer lies in the artifacts, the stuff they left behind. And it's a treasure trove of information, painting a surprisingly detailed picture of their lives in North America. Forget rusty swords and gleaming helmets. While some of those things might have been around, the most revealing artifacts are far more mundane. They're the everyday objects that tell the real story of life in a Viking settlement in a new world. Think about it. What would you take with you if you were setting up a new home in a completely foreign land? Probably not your best silverware, right? More likely, the tools of your trade, the things you need to survive. And that's exactly what the archaeologists found. One of the most striking discoveries were the ironworking tools. Not just a few stray pieces, but a whole workshop's worth. We're talking sophisticated tools, carefully crafted, showing a level of skill and expertise you wouldn't expect in a temporary campsite. These weren't just rough and ready tools for basic survival. These were the tools of skilled craftsmen, capable of producing high-quality items. This speaks volumes about the Vikings' intentions. They weren't just passing through. They were planning to stay, to build, to create. Imagine the scene. The clang of the hammer on the anvil, the sparks flying, the smell of hot iron in the air. These tools weren't just for making weapons, though undoubtedly some weapons were produced. They were also for building, for repairing, for crafting the everyday tools necessary for survival in a new environment. Think about the iron nails used in the construction of their houses, the tools they used to clear the land, the implements they used for farming or hunting. These weren't just tools. They were an investment, a testament to their commitment to establishing themselves in this new land. And the building remains themselves are equally revealing. These weren't flimsy shelters thrown together in a hurry. These were solidly built structures designed to withstand the harsh North American climate. The foundations, the post holes, the placement of buildings within the settlement all speak to a planned community, not a random collection of tents or temporary shelters. We're talking about a sophisticated understanding of construction, an ability to adapt their building techniques to the materials available in this new environment. The careful arrangement of the buildings suggests a considered approach to living, a layout designed for efficiency and practicality, not just survival. Beyond the tools and buildings, other artifacts offer fascinating glimpses into their daily lives. Imagine finding fragments of pottery, providing clues about their diet and cooking methods. Or imagine the thrill of discovering pieces of clothing, giving us an idea of what they wore, how they adapted to the climate, and what materials were available to them. These small, everyday objects are the building blocks of a richer, more nuanced understanding of their time in North America. The artifacts weren't just functional, they also offer hints of their cultural identity. While we don't find elaborate treasures, the items unearthed reflect the practicality and resilience of the Viking culture. The tools tell a story of resourcefulness and adaptation, while the building techniques show their organizational skills and the ability to build strong, lasting structures in a challenging environment. It's a culture that valued functionality and practicality, but also clearly valued the ability to create and build, a testament to their skill and determination. Even the seemingly mundane artifacts speak volumes about their ingenuity and their ability to thrive, even in a completely new and unfamiliar landscape. The excavation at Lance aux Meadows wasn't just about finding proof of a Viking presence. It was about uncovering the details of their lives, understanding their methods, and appreciating their achievements. The artifacts unearthed paint a vivid picture of a community adapting to a new world, building a life, and leaving their mark on the landscape, a legacy that continues to resonate centuries later. They weren't just visitors. They were settlers, builders, and craftsmen, leaving behind a legacy etched not just in sagas, but in the very fabric of the earth itself. Ever wondered what it takes to cross the Atlantic in a wooden boat? No GPS, no satellite weather forecasts, just the stars and sheer guts. That's exactly what the Vikings did, centuries before Columbus. Let's talk about the insane challenge of their voyages. First off, imagine the boat itself, a longship, not some luxurious cruise liner, but a narrow, open vessel built from wood and held together by skill and Viking ingenuity. These weren't leisurely pleasure crafts. They were battle-ready ships designed for speed and maneuverability, crucial in unpredictable ocean conditions. Picture the rocking and pitching, the constant threat of waves crashing over the deck, the relentless spray of salt water. These weren't pleasure cruises. These were survival tests. Navigation was a completely different ballgame. Forget your fancy electronic charts and precise GPS coordinates. The Vikings relied on the stars, the sun, the currents, and a deep understanding of the ocean's rhythms. They used celestial navigation, reading the positions of stars and constellations to determine their latitude. They learned to read the ocean itself, understanding the subtle clues hidden within the waves, the currents, and the winds. They were masters of observation, interpreting the smallest shifts in the environment to guide their course. Think about it. Getting lost meant certain death. This wasn't just about finding a new land. It was about surviving a journey that would break lesser men. Then there's the sheer distance. The Atlantic is vast, immensely flushed. Think about weeks, even months at sea, facing unrelenting storms, unpredictable winds, and the ever-present threat of storms that could easily shatter their fragile vessels. They were battling the elements, constantly fighting for survival against the raw power of nature. Imagine the mental strain, the constant fear, the physical exhaustion. It's easy to get lost in romantic notions of Viking exploration, but the reality was brutal. Provisions were another huge challenge. They had to carry enough food and water for the entire journey, a journey that could easily last for months. Think about the weight of that food, the space it consumed, the risk of spoilage. There was no supermarket at sea. They had to rely on what they could preserve, what they could carry, and what they could hunt and catch along the way. A single storm could easily wipe out their precious supplies, leaving them vulnerable to starvation. Their success depended on careful planning, meticulous preparation, and a hefty dose of luck. And let's not forget the human element. These weren't solo trips. They were undertaken by crews of men, often working together in cramped, uncomfortable conditions for months on end. Disagreements, injuries, sickness, these were all constant threats. Maintaining morale, keeping the crew focused and working together was just as crucial as navigating the ocean itself. It was a test of endurance, teamwork, and leadership. The Vikings weren't just brave, they were incredibly skilled. They were master shipbuilders, expert navigators and resilient sailors. Their voyages across the Atlantic were not mere acts of chance. They were feats of incredible planning, skill, and unwavering determination. They pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible, proving that with enough skill and courage, even the seemingly impossible could be achieved. Their journeys weren't just adventures. They were testaments to human ingenuity and the enduring spirit of exploration. These weren't just men in boats. They were pioneers, pushing the limits of human endurance and navigational prowess. They were living, breathing examples of courage, skill, and the unwavering human spirit that drives us to explore the unknown. Imagine swapping the icy fjords of Norway for the wilds of North America. A dramatic change, right? The Vikings, used to a relatively temperate climate, for Vikings, suddenly found themselves battling a completely different environment. How did they cope? Did they even survive? Let's dive into the harsh realities of their North American experience. Forget the romanticized image of lush Vinland vineyards. The reality, based on what we know from Meadows and other potential sites, was likely a lot tougher. Newfoundland's climate is, well, challenging. We're talking about shorter growing seasons, unpredictable weather, and significantly colder temperatures than they were used to. Think biting winds, heavy snowfall, and a landscape dramatically different from the familiar Scandinavian terrain. Survival wasn't a given. It was a daily battle against the elements. So, how did these hardy Norsemen adapt? First, let's talk about shelter. Their houses, as we've seen from the archaeological evidence, were remarkably well constructed. They weren't flimsy structures. They were designed to withstand the harsh weather. Think sturdy wooden frames, thick sod roofs for insulation, and clever designs to minimize wind exposure. They weren't building summer cottages. They were building homes designed to survive a harsh winter. But shelter is only half the battle. Food was crucial. The sagas speak of finding wild grapes, a tantalizing image, but the reality was likely far more complex. Farming in Newfoundland wouldn't have been easy. The short growing season limited what they could cultivate. They probably relied heavily on hunting and fishing, utilizing skills honed in their Scandinavian homeland. Imagine the challenge of hunting unfamiliar animals in a dense forest or mastering the techniques of fishing in the cold Atlantic waters. They had to adapt their hunting and fishing strategies to a completely new environment, relying on their ingenuity and resourcefulness. And then there's the question of resources. Did they find enough to sustain themselves? The evidence suggests they did, at least for a time. The presence of ironworking tools at Meadows indicates access to iron ore, or at least the ability to trade for it. The existence of the settlement itself shows they found sufficient resources to build homes, create tools, and sustain themselves. However, the short-lived nature of their settlements suggests challenges in securing a consistent and reliable supply of resources. Perhaps the harsh climate, combined with the challenges of hunting and farming in a new land, proved too difficult to overcome in the long term. Let's not forget the impact of the environment on their health. The colder climate, the different diseases, the potential for malnutrition, these would have presented significant challenges. Imagine the impact of a harsh winter on their health and their ability to work. The lack of familiar medicinal plants and treatments would have added another layer of difficulty. Survival was a constant fight against the elements, disease, and the challenges of adapting to a new and unforgiving environment. So, the question isn't just whether they could adapt, but for how long. The evidence suggests they did adapt, at least initially. They built sturdy homes, mastered new hunting and fishing techniques, and found the resources they needed to survive. But the short duration of their settlements tells another story. The harsh climate, the challenges of resource acquisition, and the unpredictable nature of the environment likely contributed to their ultimate departure. The North American environment, while offering opportunities, also presented formidable obstacles that ultimately proved too difficult to overcome for long-term settlement. Their story is a testament to their resilience, but also a stark reminder of the power of nature and the limitations of even the most resourceful people. The environment wasn't just a backdrop. It was a major player in their story, shaping their choices, influencing their survival, and ultimately dictating the fate of their North American settlements. So, we found Lance aux Meadows, undeniable proof of Vikings in North America. But the sagas talk about Vinland, a land of plenty. Was Lance aux Meadows the whole story? Or just the tip of the iceberg? Literally? The Vinland Sagas are frustratingly vague about geography. They mention Vinland, sure, but pinpointing it on a modern map? That's a whole other beast. They talk about different areas. Markland, Helluland. Sounds like a fantasy novel, right? But these names, as cryptic as they are, might actually point to real places. Think about it. These weren't GPS-guided voyages. They were using basic navigation, relying on the sun, the stars, and their own wits. Mistakes were inevitable. Descriptions were subjective. What one Viking saw as a lush meadow might look very different to a modern cartographer. Helluland, for example, is often interpreted as Baffin Island. Sounds plausible, right? Rocky, barren land. But others argue it could be Labrador. The sagas don't give us precise measurements, detailed maps, or even consistent descriptions. It's like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and the rest shuffled up. Then there's Markland, often thought to be Labrador or even Newfoundland itself. Again, it's a matter of interpretation, of weighing up vague descriptions against modern geographical knowledge. The sagas describe forests and rivers, but that could fit many places along the North American coast. And Vinland itself? The most tantalizing mystery of all. The sagas suggest a place of abundance, a land of grapes and fertile fields. Lance aux Meadows certainly doesn't fit this description. It's a harsh, rocky coastline. So, was it just a temporary base, a staging point for further exploration? Or was Vinland somewhere else entirely? Somewhere warmer, more hospitable? Some theories place Vinland further south, maybe even down the eastern coast of North America. Others suggest it could be a composite, a general term encompassing several different locations visited by the Vikings. Imagine the Norse explorers, landing in different places, each with its own unique characteristics, all collectively remembered as Vinland. The problem is the sagas are inconsistent. Different versions of the sagas tell slightly different stories, leading to conflicting interpretations. It's like comparing different translations of a book. They all tell the same basic story, but the nuances, the details, can vary significantly. And these aren't just minor discrepancies. They lead to major differences in how we interpret the geography of Vinland. So, was Vinland one place, a specific location we haven't yet identified? Or was it a collective term, encompassing a series of exploratory voyages along the North American coast? The answer, quite frankly, is still shrouded in mystery. We have the sagas, we have Lance aux Meadows, but the precise boundaries of Vinland remain frustratingly elusive. It's a puzzle that continues to fascinate historians and archaeologists, a testament to the enduring power of the Viking saga and the tantalizing mystery of their voyages to the New World. The search continues. The pieces are scattered, but the picture, I suspect, is more vast and complex than we originally imagined. So we found the evidence. Vikings were in North America. They built a village, they worked the land, they even forged iron. But their story in the New World was surprisingly short. Why? Why did these incredible explorers, who braved the Atlantic in open boats, suddenly pack up and leave? Did they get kicked out? Or did they just decide, nah, this place isn't for us? The truth, as always with history, is probably a bit more complicated than a simple yes or no. The Vinland Sagas offer a few clues, but they're like cryptic riddles, hinting at conflict, but not giving us the full picture. They describe encounters with the indigenous people, the Skraelings, and these encounters weren't always friendly. The sagas tell tales of skirmishes, of misunderstandings, of violence. But were these isolated incidents, or something more significant? Did these conflicts drive the Vikings out? Let's be clear. The sagas are written from a Viking perspective. They're not objective accounts. They're stories told by the victors, or at least, those who survived. We only hear one side of the story. We don't have the Skraeling's version of events, their perspective on these encounters. And that makes it hard to understand the true extent of the conflict. Were the Vikings aggressive invaders, pushing their way into established territories? Or were they simply trying to survive, getting caught in a clash of cultures and competing resources? The archaeological record at Lance aux Meadows itself offers some clues. The settlement wasn't destroyed by fire or violence, at least not in a way that's readily apparent. There's no evidence of a brutal massacre or a sudden, violent end to their time there. This suggests that the Vikings might not have been driven out forcibly, but that doesn't mean things were peaceful. There might have been enough tension, enough skirmishes, enough difficulty in coexisting with the indigenous population to make the Vikings decide to leave. Think about the logistics. Setting up a colony across the ocean is insanely difficult. It requires a constant supply of resources, a reliable network of trade, and the ability to adapt to a completely new environment. The Vikings were resourceful, but even their skills had limits. The harsh North American climate, the challenges of farming in a new land, the difficulties in securing a consistent food supply. These factors likely played a significant role. Maybe the Vikings simply realized that establishing a lasting settlement was more difficult than they initially anticipated. It's also possible that the Vikings just underestimated the challenges. Their initial expeditions were likely exploratory, focused on finding resources and assessing the potential of the land. They might have discovered that the promised land of the sagas was a bit less bountiful than the story suggested. Maybe the resources weren't as readily available as they had hoped, or the climate proved too challenging for long-term settlement. They might have simply decided that the cost of maintaining a colony outweighed the benefits. The short-lived nature of the settlements might also reflect the Viking social structure. They weren't a unified nation-state with a centralized government pushing for colonization. They were a collection of relatively independent groups, operating on a more individual or clan-based level. Maybe the initial expeditions were driven by individual ambition, exploration, and the pursuit of resources, rather than a coordinated effort to establish a large-scale colony. Once the initial enthusiasm waned, or the challenges became too great, the groups may have simply decided to return home. The available evidence points toward a complex interplay of factors. Conflicts with the indigenous population probably played a role, but the challenges of the environment and the limitations of their resources were likely just as significant. It's also possible that the Vikings simply lacked the long-term commitment and organizational structure needed to establish a truly lasting colony in a completely new world. The Vikings' presence in North America wasn't a failure, but a fascinating chapter in a much larger story. A story of exploration, adaptation, and the challenges of establishing a new life in an unfamiliar land, thousands of miles from home. Their short-lived settlements are a testament to their courage and resilience, but also a reminder of the immense difficulties faced by early explorers and the complexities of intercultural contact. It wasn't a simple story of conquest or failure. It was a complex dance between two vastly different cultures, a dance that ultimately ended with the Vikings sailing back across the ocean, leaving behind a legacy etched in the earth and in the pages of the sagas. Okay, so we've established that the Vikings likely beat Columbus to North America. But were they the only ones? Before you dismiss this as some wild conspiracy theory, let's explore something truly mind-blowing. The possibility of other pre-Columbian contacts with the Americas. Were there other visitors, other explorers, who left their mark on this continent long before Columbus ever set sail? The idea might seem far-fetched, but the evidence, while often debated and sometimes circumstantial, is intriguing enough to warrant serious consideration. Forget the neat, tidy narrative of European discovery. The reality is far messier, far more fascinating, and potentially far more ancient. Let's start with the Polynesians. These incredible seafarers navigated the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, settling islands thousands of miles apart. Their navigational skills were legendary, their voyages epic. So, could they have also crossed the Atlantic? Some theories suggest they might have, pointing to possible similarities between Polynesian tools and artifacts found in South America. It's a long shot, admittedly, but the sheer audacity of their Pacific voyages makes the Atlantic crossing seem a little less impossible. The evidence is far from conclusive, but the possibility remains a tantalizing one. Then there's the question of ancient Asian contacts. Archaeological discoveries in South America have revealed artifacts and cultural similarities that some researchers link to Asian origins. These similarities range from specific tools and technologies to architectural styles and even linguistic patterns. Could ancient Asian civilizations have made the journey across the Pacific, establishing contact with the Americas long before the arrival of Europeans? Again, the evidence is complex and often debated, but the sheer scale of the Pacific Ocean doesn't rule out the possibility of accidental or intentional voyages. The prevailing winds and currents could have made such a journey, while challenging, not entirely inconceivable. We're talking about timescales spanning millennia, allowing for multiple attempts and potential settlements, some of which might have left barely a trace. And what about Africa? The idea of African contact with the Americas before Columbus is perhaps the most controversial, but also the most compelling in some respects. Some researchers point to similarities in certain architectural styles, agricultural practices, and even genetic markers. Could African explorers or traders have made their way across the Atlantic, perhaps using currents and stellar navigation, establishing contact with the Americas and leaving behind a legacy that remains largely undiscovered? This is a highly sensitive area of research, often fraught with political and social implications. However, the possibility, while controversial, cannot be entirely dismissed. The sheer audacity of the Viking voyages and the impressive navigational skills of Polynesian sailors should remind us that the seemingly impossible can sometimes become reality. It's important to note that these are theories, not established facts. The evidence for pre-Columbian contact from sources other than the Vikings is often fragmented, debated, and open to interpretation. The challenges of dating artifacts, interpreting cultural similarities, and accounting for the possibility of independent invention make it difficult to draw definitive conclusions. However, to dismiss the possibility out of hand is to ignore the potential for a far richer, more complex, and far more fascinating history of human interaction with the Americas. The discovery of the Viking settlements at Longboats, Meadows fundamentally shifted our understanding of pre-Columbian contact. It proved that Europeans reached North America long before Columbus. But the question remains, were they alone? The possibility of other pre-Columbian contacts from various parts of the world adds a layer of intrigue and complexity to the narrative of the discovery of America, challenging the traditional Eurocentric view of history. The evidence may be scarce, the interpretations often contentious, but the possibility of other explorers, other travelers, other cultures leaving their mark on the Americas before Columbus remains a compelling and fascinating area of ongoing research. The story of the Americas is far from complete. It's a story still being written, still being uncovered, one piece of evidence at a time. Okay, so Vikings in North America, we've got the evidence. But what about the people who were already there? The indigenous populations. Did these unexpected visitors, these Norse seafarers, leave any kind of lasting mark on the lives of the Native Americans? It's a question that's as complex as it is crucial, because it's not just about a historical footnote. It's about understanding the impact of contact, the ripples of a collision between two vastly different worlds. The Vinland Sagas, remember, give us glimpses, but mostly from a Viking perspective. They talk about encounters with the Skraelings, a rather vague term for the indigenous peoples. But often these descriptions are filtered through a lens of fear, suspicion, and occasional violence. We get hints of trade, of conflict, of uneasy coexistence, but rarely a detailed picture of lasting impact. It's like looking at a blurry photograph. You get a sense of the scene, but the details are lost. The archaeological evidence, frustratingly, doesn't offer a crystal-clear answer either. Longboats Meadows shows us the Vikings' presence, their way of life, but it doesn't directly tell us the full story of their interaction with the local populations. We find Viking artifacts, but not a lot of clear evidence of cultural exchange or significant long-term influence on the indigenous tools, technologies, or way of life. This doesn't mean there wasn't any interaction. It means the evidence is subtle, difficult to interpret, and possibly buried under the sands of time. Think about the short time the Vikings were there. Their settlements were temporary, their presence fleeting. Compared to the centuries-long presence of European colonists later on, the Viking impact was relatively brief. This short time frame might explain the lack of obvious, large-scale changes in indigenous cultures. But that doesn't mean the impact was insignificant. Even a brief encounter can leave a mark, a subtle shift in the course of history. Let's consider the possibility of indirect impact. Even if there wasn't a massive cultural exchange of ideas, the Vikings' presence could have had unforeseen consequences. The introduction of new diseases, for instance, could have had a devastating effect on populations who lacked immunity. Think about the impact of European diseases on the indigenous populations in later centuries. A similar, albeit smaller scale, event could have taken place during the Viking Age. We simply lack the evidence to confirm or deny this. Then there's the question of genetic impact. While not extensively studied, genetic analysis could potentially reveal traces of Viking DNA in indigenous populations. This would be a significant piece of the puzzle, confirming a level of interaction that goes beyond simple trade or conflict. However, this is a complex area of research, and results would need to be carefully interpreted, considering the limitations of current genetic analysis techniques. What about cultural exchange? Even brief interactions can lead to the exchange of ideas, technologies, or even artistic motifs. Could the Vikings have introduced new tools or techniques that were adopted by the indigenous people? Or did indigenous crafts influence Viking designs in some subtle way? These are questions that require further research, a deeper dive into the archaeological record, and a more nuanced comparison of cultural artifacts. The reality is, we are still piecing together a very fragmented puzzle. The available evidence, while suggestive, doesn't offer a definitive answer. The short-lived nature of the Viking settlements, the lack of abundant archaeological evidence of direct interaction, and the limitations of the historical sources all contribute to the difficulty of determining the extent of their impact. But to conclude that the Vikings had no lasting impact would be premature. The possibility of indirect effects, genetic traces, or subtle cultural exchanges remains. The absence of clear evidence doesn't equal the absence of impact. The story of the Vikings in North America is a story still unfolding, a story that requires further investigation, more careful analysis, and a willingness to consider the complexities of intercultural contact in a world where communication and understanding weren't always easy to come by. The full extent of their influence on the indigenous populations remains a compelling mystery, a challenge for future researchers to unravel. Ever tried reading a 1,000-year-old text message? It's a bit like that, trying to decipher the Vinland Sagas. These aren't your typical history books, neatly printed and easily understood. They're a jumble of stories, passed down through generations, whispered around crackling fires, each storyteller adding their own spin, their own embellishments, their own, well, maybe a few tall tales. So how do we even begin to separate fact from fantasy? The language itself is the first hurdle. Old Norse isn't exactly everyday conversation. It's evolved, changed, been influenced by other languages over the centuries. Think of it like trying to understand Shakespeare. You need a little help, a little translation, a lot of context. And with the sagas, the context is, well, it's practically non-existent. We're talking about piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces, faded colors, and the occasional mischievous gremlin who swapped a few pieces around. The sagas weren't written down as a single, unified account. They're a collection of different versions, different interpretations, sometimes contradictory details. Imagine a game of telephone, played for 1,000 years. By the time the stories were finally written down, they'd been through countless retellings, each adding their own flavor, their own perspective. So, How do we know what's accurate and what's pure embellishment? That's where the linguistic detective work comes in. Scholars painstakingly compare different versions of the sagas, looking for common threads, consistent details, clues that might hint at historical reality. They analyze the language itself, looking for stylistic variations, changes in vocabulary, phrases that might point to a specific time period or geographical location. It's a slow, painstaking process like sifting through sand to find a single gold nugget. The vocabulary is a key element. Words describing ships, tools, clothing, these can be incredibly revealing. If a word appears consistently across different versions of the sagas, it lends credibility to its accuracy. But if a word is unique to a single version, it might indicate a later edition, a storyteller's flourish, an embellishment added over time. The grammar is another clue. Old Norse grammar is complex, with subtle shifts and variations that can pinpoint a specific time period. By analyzing the grammatical structures used in the sagas, scholars can get a better sense of when the stories were originally composed, helping to separate earlier, potentially more accurate accounts from later editions. Then there's the challenge of interpretation. Even if we understand the words, understanding the meaning is another matter entirely. The sagas are filled with metaphors, similes, and cultural references that are lost on a modern reader. Consider the descriptions of the Skraelings, the indigenous people encountered by the Vikings. The language used often carries a strong bias, reflecting the Viking perspective, their fears, and their prejudices. Understanding the true nature of these encounters requires careful analysis, a sensitivity to the cultural context, and a willingness to question the assumptions embedded within the text. And let's not forget the role of oral tradition. The sagas were passed down orally for generations before being committed to writing. This means that the stories were constantly evolving, adapting, being shaped by the experiences and perspectives of each storyteller. This oral transmission process inevitably led to variations, embellishments, and even the loss of certain details. Reconstructing the original stories, the kernel of historical truth at the heart of the saga, requires a deep understanding of the dynamics of oral transmission and the ways in which stories change over time. It's a delicate balancing act, separating the layers of narrative to find the original essence. So, deciphering the language of the sagas is more than just translation. It's about historical detective work, linguistic analysis, and a deep understanding of cultural context. It's about piecing together a fragmented puzzle, separating the layers of narrative to reveal the underlying truth, a truth that may be elusive, incomplete, but potentially profoundly revealing. The language itself is a key to understanding the Vikings' journey to the New World, a key that unlocks not just the words, but the realities of their experience, separating the bold claims of legend from the often more intriguing realities of history. And that, my friends, is a story worth unraveling. So, we've got the sagas, whispering tales of Vinland. We've got Lance, Meadows, a tangible Viking village frozen in time. But how do we know it's all really Viking? And how do we know when it all happened? How do we bridge the gap between legend and history, between story and scientific fact? The answer, my friends, lies in the power of modern science. Get ready for some serious detective work, because we're talking carbon dating, dendrochronology, and a whole host of other scientific tools that are rewriting history before our very eyes. Forget the fuzzy images of archaeologists brushing away dirt with paintbrushes. This isn't Indiana Jones stuff. This is precise, meticulous science, capable of revealing details that were previously unimaginable. Carbon dating, for instance, is a game changer. It's based on the fact that all living things absorb carbon-14, a radioactive isotope, from the atmosphere. When something dies, the carbon-14 starts to decay at a predictable rate. By measuring the amount of carbon-14 remaining in organic material, like wood from a Viking house or a piece of charcoal from their cooking fire, scientists can determine how long ago that material was alive. Think about the implications. A piece of wood from a house post at Lance, Meadows. Carbon dating tells us precisely when that tree was cut down. Suddenly, we're not just guessing at the age of the settlement. We're getting a precise date, a tangible link to the past. It's not just a matter of sometime before Columbus. It's a specific year, a specific time frame, bringing the Viking presence into sharp focus. And this isn't just guesswork. It's based on established scientific principles, rigorously tested and validated over decades of research. It's science, not speculation. But carbon dating isn't the only tool in the scientists' arsenal. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, offers another level of precision. Each ring represents a year of growth, and the width of the ring reflects the climate conditions during that year. By comparing the ring patterns of ancient wood found at Viking sites with the known patterns of trees in the region, scientists can create incredibly accurate chronologies, pinpointing the exact years when particular trees were felled. This gives us an even more precise timeline of construction and occupation, allowing us to build a more detailed picture of the Viking presence in North America. And it's not just wood. Scientists analyze metal artifacts, too. The composition of the iron tools, the types of alloys used, the methods of working the metal, all provide clues about the technology and techniques employed by the Vikings. By comparing these findings to known Viking metalworking practices in Scandinavia and Greenland, researchers can establish links, confirming the Norse origin of the artifacts and adding another layer of evidence to support the Viking presence. This isn't just about finding a hammer. It's about understanding the metallurgical skills of the people who used it, confirming the technological sophistication of their exploration. Archaeologists also use techniques like stratigraphy, studying the layers of sediment and soil to determine the sequence of events at a site. They carefully excavate, documenting the position of each artifact, each layer of soil, creating a detailed record of the site's history. This allows them to reconstruct the timeline of occupation, understand the sequence of construction, and determine the duration of the Viking presence. It's like peeling back the layers of time, revealing the story buried beneath the surface. And then there's the analysis of pollen and plant remains. Studying the types of plants found at a site, the pollen grains preserved in the soil, the seeds and plant fragments recovered during excavations, tells us about the environment, the vegetation, and even the types of food consumed by the Vikings. This allows scientists to reconstruct the landscape, understand the climate conditions at the time, and assess the resources available to the Vikings. It's not just about finding a few bones. It's about reconstructing a whole ecosystem, understanding the interaction between the Vikings and their environment. All of these scientific methods, carbon dating, dendrochronology, metallurgical analysis, stratigraphy, pollen analysis, and more, work together, creating a powerful network of evidence. They don't just confirm the presence of Vikings in North America. They provide a detailed and precise timeline of their arrival, the duration of their stay, and the nature of their activities. They transform the sagas from intriguing stories into verifiable historical events, grounded in scientific fact. They turn whispers of legend into the clear voice of scientific evidence, providing a powerful and compelling narrative that transcends speculation and enters the realm of verifiable fact. The story of the Vikings in North America is no longer just a story. It's a meticulously researched and scientifically validated chapter in the history of human exploration. So, we cracked the code, right? Vikings in North America, case closed. Not so fast, my friend. Even with all the evidence, the sagas, Lance aux Meadows, the scientific dating, a whole heap of questions still linger in the chilly North Atlantic air. This isn't a neatly wrapped-up history lesson. It's a thrilling mystery with plenty of twists and turns yet to come. Let's start with the big one, the Vinland mystery itself. We found Lance aux Meadows, but where's the rest of Vinland? The sagas paint a picture of lush meadows, grapes growing wild, a far cry from the rocky coastline of Newfoundland. Was Lance aux Meadows just a temporary stop, a refueling station on a longer journey? Did the Vikings explore further south, establishing other, undiscovered settlements? The tantalizing possibility of more Viking sites hidden along the North American coastline keeps archaeologists and historians buzzing with excitement. Imagine the potential discoveries waiting to be unearthed, new settlements, new artifacts, new pieces of this incredible puzzle. The search for Vinland is far from over. Then there's the Skraelings. The sagas mention conflicts, trade, encounters, but the details are frustratingly vague. Were these just isolated incidents, or was there a more sustained, complex interaction between the Vikings and the indigenous populations? What was the real nature of these encounters? Were they peaceful trades or violent clashes? Did the Vikings significantly impact the indigenous cultures or vice versa? This is where anthropological research comes in, piecing together the indigenous perspective, trying to understand their experiences from their point of view, not just through the lens of Viking narratives. We need more research, more collaboration with indigenous communities to build a more complete and nuanced understanding of this pivotal moment in history. And what about the Vikings themselves? Why did they leave? Was it conflict with the Skraelings? The harsh climate? The difficulty of establishing a sustainable colony? Or something else entirely? We need a deeper understanding of their motivations, their strategies, their reasons for ultimately abandoning their North American settlements. This requires a more detailed analysis of the archaeological record, a deeper dive into the sagas themselves, and a more comprehensive understanding of Viking societal structures and decision-making processes. We need to move beyond simplistic narratives of conquest and failure, delving into the complexities of their choices and their experiences. The technology they used is another intriguing area of ongoing debate. How did they navigate the vast Atlantic? Their navigational skills were incredible, but the exact methods they used remain a subject of ongoing research and debate. Analyzing the construction of their ships, studying their navigational tools, and exploring the potential use of celestial navigation. All of this can help us better understand the ingenuity and skill of these remarkable seafarers. Further research into their shipbuilding techniques, their navigational tools, and their understanding of ocean currents could shed more light on the logistical challenges they faced and the remarkable skills they possessed. And finally, let's not forget the broader implications. If the Vikings did indeed establish settlements in North America, how did this impact the subsequent arrival of Columbus and the European colonization of the Americas? Did the Vikings' presence leave any lasting ecological or genetic footprint? These are big questions with far-reaching implications, requiring interdisciplinary research drawing on expertise from various fields: archaeology, anthropology, genetics, and history. The more we learn, the more we realize how interconnected the threads of history are. The ongoing debate isn't just about filling in gaps in our knowledge. It's about challenging our assumptions, reevaluating our understanding of the past, and building a more complete, more nuanced, and more accurate picture of this crucial chapter in human history. The questions remain, but the tools to answer them are constantly evolving. New technologies, new approaches, new collaborations. All of these promise to reveal more details, more insights, more pieces of this fascinating puzzle. The story of the Vikings in North America is far from finished. It's a story that continues to unfold, a story we are still writing, one discovery at a time. Ever imagined a world where Columbus isn't the first European to set foot in the Americas? Sound crazy, right? Like rewriting a cornerstone of history textbooks. But that's exactly what the Vinland Saga forces us to do. It's not just about adding a few names to a list. It's about fundamentally reshaping our understanding of early transatlantic exploration. For centuries, the narrative has been clean, simple, almost convenient. Columbus, the intrepid explorer, stumbles upon a new world, changing the course of history forever. A heroic tale etched in our minds since childhood. But the Vinland Saga throws a giant wrench into that perfectly polished machine. Suddenly, Columbus isn't the first. He's just one of many, albeit one with a significantly larger impact. The impact of this revelation is massive. It's not just about shifting dates in a history book. It's about shattering a long-held belief, a central pillar of the traditional narrative. It forces us to question the very foundation of our understanding of discovery. Was it a single event, a singular moment of contact? Or was it a gradual process, a series of encounters spanning centuries, involving multiple cultures and diverse motivations. The Vinland Saga firmly places exploration in a far more complex, multi-layered context. Think about the implications for the very concept of discovery. The traditional narrative paints a picture of a pristine, untouched continent, suddenly encountered by European explorers. But the Vinland Saga forces us to acknowledge a pre-existing history, a complex web of human interaction that existed long before Columbus. Suddenly, the discovery of America isn't a singular event, but a process, a long and intricate unfolding of contact, conflict, and cultural exchange. It's a story that's far more nuanced, far more interesting, and far more challenging than the simplified version we've all been taught. The story isn't just about the Vikings themselves. It's about the indigenous populations of North America, their lives, their cultures, their interactions with these unexpected visitors from across the ocean. The Vinland Saga compels us to consider their perspective, their experiences, their role in this complex historical narrative. It highlights the limitations of viewing history solely through the lens of the colonizers, reminding us to consider the perspectives and experiences of those who are already there. It's a call to decolonize our understanding of history, to move beyond a Eurocentric viewpoint and appreciate the richness and complexity of pre-Columbian societies. Furthermore, the Vinland Saga challenges our assumptions about European technological superiority. For centuries, the narrative has portrayed Europeans as technologically advanced, pioneering explorers, while often portraying indigenous populations as less sophisticated. But the Vikings' successful transatlantic voyages, their ability to build sturdy settlements in a harsh environment, and their sophisticated craftsmanship challenge this simplistic view. It shows that advanced navigational and technological skills existed outside of Europe long before Columbus, demonstrating that the discovery of the Americas was not simply a matter of technological superiority, but a far more complex interplay of factors. The Vinland Saga changes not just the when of early transatlantic exploration, but also the who. It's no longer a simple story of one explorer, one nation, one moment of discovery. It's a story of multiple actors, multiple cultures, and a complex web of interactions spanning centuries. It forces us to acknowledge the potential contributions of other cultures, other explorers, perhaps even other continents, in shaping the history of the Americas. It expands a narrative beyond a single triumphant hero to encompass a far richer, more complex tapestry of human endeavor and interaction. The implications ripple outwards. The Vinland Saga reframes our understanding of not just the exploration of the Americas, but also the broader context of early global interactions. It challenges our assumptions about cultural dominance, technological advancement, and the very definition of discovery. It's a powerful reminder that history is far more nuanced than any single narrative can capture. It's a tapestry woven from multiple threads, each with its own unique story, its own perspective, its own contribution to the grand narrative of human history. It's a story waiting to be fully explored, a story whose threads are still being uncovered, one fascinating discovery at a time. And that, in itself, is perhaps the most compelling aspect of the Vinland Saga's legacy. It's a constant reminder that the past is never truly fixed, but always evolving, always being reinterpreted, always demanding a deeper, more critical examination. So, the million-dollar question, did the Vikings discover America? We've spent this whole time diving deep into the sagas, unearthing artifacts, and piecing together a 1,000-year-old puzzle. And the answer, based on the overwhelming weight of evidence, is a resounding maybe. Yeah, I know, that's not the satisfying conclusion you were hoping for. But history isn't always neat and tidy, is it? It's messy, complicated, and full of unanswered questions. The evidence strongly suggests a compelling case for Viking presence in North America centuries before Columbus. Meadows isn't a figment of imagination. It's a real place, a tangible testament to Viking exploration. The artifacts, the building techniques, the sheer audacity of the voyage. It all points towards a significant Norse presence on these shores. The carbon dating, the dendrochronology, science backs up the stories. But compelling doesn't mean complete. We've scratched the surface, but the ocean depths of this historical mystery remain largely unexplored. The Vinland Sagas, our primary source, are filled with tantalizing clues, but they're also filled with inconsistencies, exaggerations, and the inevitable distortions of centuries of oral storytelling. We're piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces, and some of the pieces we think we have might not even fit. Think about the geography. The sagas describe Vinland as a land of abundance, a place of lush meadows and wild grapes. Lance aux Meadows, while undeniably a Viking settlement, doesn't exactly fit that description. Was it a temporary base camp? A staging ground for further exploration? Or was Vinland somewhere else entirely? A different location, perhaps further south along the coast? We simply don't know yet. And then there are the Skraelings, the indigenous people. The sagas mention encounters, some peaceful, some violent. But these accounts are filtered through a Viking lens, offering a limited, often biased perspective. What was the experience of the indigenous populations? What was their perspective on these unexpected visitors? These are crucial questions that remain largely unanswered, shrouded in the mists of time. We need to hear their stories, too, to build a more complete and more accurate understanding of what happened. The impact of the Vikings on the indigenous populations is also a huge unknown. Did the brief Viking presence significantly alter the course of indigenous history? Did it introduce new diseases, new technologies, new ways of life? Or was the impact minimal, fleeting, leaving barely a trace on the grand tapestry of Native American history? We need more research, more collaboration with indigenous communities to fully understand this critical aspect of the story. So, did they discover America? Based on the compelling evidence we have, the answer leans heavily towards yes. The Vikings were here, they built settlements, they left behind tangible traces of their presence. But the full story? That remains elusive, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. The picture is far from complete. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of this incredible historical enigma. We've got the broad strokes, but the fine details, the nuances, the full picture, that's still out there, waiting to be discovered. And that's why this story is so captivating. It's a story that challenges our assumptions, forces us to reevaluate what we think we know, and reminds us that the past is never truly closed. It's a story that continues to unfold, with new discoveries adding new layers of complexity and intrigue, keeping us all on the edge of our seats. Now, I want to hear your thoughts. What questions do you have about the Viking discovery of America? What other theories have you heard? Let's discuss it in the comments.